time, I'm sure you have had an opportunity today to engage with your French combatants over this tuition fee story. So
I sure did.
let me be. Yeah, go ahead.
I was on with a former CAC member of the National Assembly named Joël Boutin, and I was on, of course, with Mathieu Bock-Côté. So a lively time was had by all.
Lively.
We had a lively time yesterday with Jean-François Lisée over this.
Well, it's interesting because I had a chance, Natasha, to listen to the verbatim of that exchange, and I want to try to take apart a part of his argument. His argument goes something like this. In no scenario, he always uses that expression, so this is supposed to be an absolute statement of truth. In no scenario will McGill wind up having less than what it had. So that's a rhetorical trick that Trudeau uses, for example, when he's talking about budgets in the Defense Department. So let's stay with the Trudeau example for 30 seconds so people will understand. A couple of weeks ago, they announced they're taking $1 billion out of the budgets for defense. The senior generals are pulling their hair out, saying we don't know where we're going to be able to find that kind of money. So Trudeau gets the question in the House, and he stands up with all the seriousness in the world and says, we're not reducing the defense budgets. So the trick that he's using there, he's saying, well, we had already announced we were going to increase them more than $1 billion. So if we're just taking $1 billion out, those budgets are still more than they would have been in the first place. That's the same trick that Jean-François Lisée was using yesterday. He says, well, you've got to go back to when Couillard was in power, and they came up with this deal to describe what the universities could keep from foreign students or students coming in from other Canadian provinces. And that gave this much money. And all the government's taking back is less than that. So it actually, in no scenario is McGill getting less than what it had a whole bunch of years ago when Couillard came in with this thing. So it's a trick. Of course, they're removing students, and they're removing sources of revenue, and they're increasing the tuition. And the reason they're doing it was given by Pascal Derry, the minister. She said word for word, yes, this will reduce the number of Anglophone students at McGill, Concordia, and Bishops. And yes, it will hurt them. And that's what we want, because we've decided that it has something to do with the strength of the French language in Montreal. Now, that's an interesting argument, but it's put forward as an article of faith and a fact. There is no factual evidence of a causal link between the presence of English-speaking students at those universities and the fate of the French language in Montreal. But since all of this debate takes place on anecdote, I hear much more English in the street in Montreal now, and this is causing the decline of French. So it's a bit of a mug's game to argue against that. But I did that in my own debate last Friday on the French radio show that I do every day with Jean-François Lisée. We had a knockdown, drag-out fight about this. And it became personal, and he was trying to throw everything back at me. I said, you have no evidence. It's not because you're saying it that it becomes a fact. It's not because you believe it that it's evidence. And by the way, the good news is there's going to be a very large book published in 4 weeks on the demographics and linguistics here in Quebec. And it's going to be a heck of a lot more nuanced than anything we're getting out of the CAC government. But look at what we've had. We've had Pascal Derry, she went to the Bishops' Forum, August 14th, 2022. She made a vibrant plea for keeping those universities going and keeping the students here in Quebec, the exact opposite of what she's saying now. Éric Girard, in front of the biggest audience of Chamber of Commerce and Board of Trade types in Montreal, vibrant plea to make sure that McGill stays excellent. Look, McGill's now behind the U of T, and look, we need McGill, and we need this excellence, and we need this to help bring people to invest and be part of life in Quebec. Legault is in trouble. He knows that he's got the PQ breathing down his neck. They just beat him up badly in a by-election in Quebec City. And he's just being a politician. He's staking out all of this turf on the linguistic front that he's afraid to see go over to the PQ. And by the way, the evidence of that is that in all of her interventions towards the end of last week, Pascal Derry was a muddle of misstated facts. It was just all being thrown out there. There was no serious research, nothing behind this, and that's why there was never any consultation on this. It's a pure political maneuver by Legault and the CAC, and I find it a real shame that Pascal Derry is lending herself to this exercise, because it can only bring more harm to Montreal, to Quebec, and frankly, a lot of people in the English-speaking community are just putting their palms in the air and saying, really, we're back at this? This is what we've come down to, going after the English-speaking community and its institutions? it's just like being in a time capsule going back 40 years.
So you mentioned, of course, you're doing this today with people on the French side in media. We noticed as well that at least it seems this time around on this subject, there has been some support from the French side, which rarely happens when it comes to issues like this. Has that been surprising to you?
No, because any right-thinking person is going to say it's in the interest of Quebec to keep these vibrant institutions going. This is excellence. This is something that helps all of Quebec. You bring in top-flight researchers. And by the way, Natasha's always great at pointing out that she's exactly that type of person. Natasha chose to put down roots here and stay here. And by the way, Natasha, I've heard you speak French. You speak perfect, unaccented, fluent French.
Thank you, Tom.
And that's what we want. We want people who have lived the experience of this great multicultural city, this great international French-speaking city of Montreal. We want them to stay here and to be part of it. But this is off-putting. This is sending out the exact opposite message. It's parochial, it's narrow-minded, it's closing doors. But this is the game that Legault's chosen to play. He's a politician first and foremost, and he's showing it again.
How does this all end? I'm already thinking the repercussions it's having across the rest of the country. We know that this story's been picked up, across Canada now. So already Quebec is being painted in a negative light once again. At any point, does François Legault say, oops?
When it makes it onto 60 Minutes.
Right.
I mean, that was, I remember that, and that is going back 40 years. And we had Inspector Clouseau. That wasn't my name. That's what the person from 60 Minutes was calling the language inspector. They followed around for a whole day. And it's when it becomes a subject of, really, this is the society you want to live in. This is the society you want to build. And in one of those French panel shows that I do all the time, this goes back a couple of months, but one of the people who participates was actually complaining bitterly that she sometimes has to hear two people speaking English to each other when she goes to Carrefour Laval. Mm-hmm. And I just threw up my hands like, well, what kind of society do you want to live in where the government actually gets to decide what language people can speak to each other? Look, the good news is there's never been a larger proportion of the people in the greater Montreal area who can hold a conversation in French. It's well over 90%. And that's a great thing for the French language, but you'll never hear that statistic. You'll always hear people try to cherry pick something or just to affirm an opinion that they'll try to pass off as fact. I think that that's the biggest danger, is that there's no room for actual expertise in this file. That's why I'm so glad that this big book is coming out in about 4 weeks.
I just want to follow up one last thing on this, and then we'll move on. This idea, as Jean-François Lisée said when we asked, this will mean nothing financially to institutions like McGill, perhaps in Concordia, although it might to bishops. Yet we heard exactly the opposite from both McGill and Concordia. What do you think?
If he did indeed say that, it's completely false. Of course it's going to have a serious effect on them financially. And by the way, one of the first things that McGill announced, and I don't think it was done that well, and it shows that those institutions are really not good at taking part in these knockdown, drag-out fights that are part and parcel of life in Quebec. You've really got to learn how to do the rough and tumble of a Quebec political debate. And I'm still waiting to hear something from the principal of McGill other than a written statement, because these are big debates, and you've got to be part of it if they're affecting you. But McGill had put together a plan to spend $10 million a year for 5 years, so a pot of $50 million to try to help with Francization and the quality and the quantity of French in and around the downtown core where it's established. And the first thing that they said was, well, we're putting this in abeyance. We're putting this on hold, obviously, with what we just learned. There was no consultation on this. It's a pure political maneuver. Go through the statements. My favorite was Pascal Derry had this line. She kept repeating over and over again. So she kept saying, well, we're going to stop, giving these deals for people who come to study here and then go work somewhere else. So she kept saying that it's for people who come to study here and then go somewhere else. So I'm sort of going, okay, so what about the Natasha Halls of this world? What about the ones who come here, study here, and stay here? Like, do they get their tuition back, or do they get a check back? But of course, nobody had thought about that line. She just kept repeating it ad nauseum because it was supposed to reinforce the idea that they were doing something fair, because they were just, charging more. Universities are about going to other places. You're a top-notch French-Canadian student. You want to go to the London School of Economics. You want to be at Harvard. You want to be part of the world. And you want to make sure that your expertise, you can bring it back here and apply it. And this is what universities are supposed to be all about. But of course, that means they're about open minds. And with François Legault, it's the exact opposite. It's a very narrow, closed mind. I always go back to what Graham Fraser reminded of the night that he became a candidate for the first time for the PQ. In answer to someone, he said, I hate the English as much as you do. And I think that this is what comes out time and again when you see the behavior of François Legault.
Certainly starting to look that way. Tom, thank you. Appreciate it.